They didn't just want my tree gone. They wanted it erased, ground into wood chips so their beige, cookie-cutter suburb could pretend nature never existed here at all. But you don't pick a fight with a 100-year-old oak. And you sure as hell don't pick a fight with me. The tree was here before the town. It was here before the paved roads, before the county lines were drawn, and long before a group of developers decided to name a treeless subdivision Whispering Pines. It's a massive white oak. Its trunk is so thick that if 3 grown men linked arms, they couldn't wrap around it. The bark is deeply ridged, armored, and scarred by lightning, rot, and a century of brutal winters. I bought the property 10 years ago, an old farmhouse sitting on 2 acres of untamed land. Back then, my nearest neighbor was a mile away. The oak stood in my front yard like a quiet guardian. In the summer, its canopy dropped the temperature by 10 degrees. In the fall, it dumped hundreds of pounds of acorns onto the dirt driveway, sounding like a chaotic hailstorm. I loved every broken branch, every pile of dead leaves. It was real. Then came the developers. They bought the farmland surrounding my lot. For 2 years, I lived in a cloud of diesel exhaust and pulverized drywall. They leveled the rolling hills. They clear-cut the maples, the sycamores, and the ash trees, feeding them into industrial chippers that screamed from sunrise to sunset. They stripped the topsoil and replaced it with identical quarter-acre parcels of sod. Within 24 months, my weathered farmhouse was surrounded by 75 identical, vinyl-sided boxes, beige siding, faux stone facades, 2-car garages, and in the front yard of each home, they planted a single, pathetic dogwood sapling tied to a stake, shivering in the wind. My oak towered over the new subdivision like a middle finger to modern suburban planning. It didn't take long for the Homeowners Association to form. They called themselves the Whispering Pines Property Owners Board. I didn't care. I wasn't part of their subdivision. My deed was older than the paved road out front. I ignored their inaugural meeting flyers. I ignored the neighborhood block party invitations. I just wanted to be left alone, to drink my coffee on the porch and watch the squirrels launch themselves out of the oak's upper branches. The first letter arrived in late September. It wasn't mailed. It was taped to my front door with blue painter's tape. The paper was heavily branded with a cheap, clip art logo of a pine tree. "Dear homeowner," it read, "it has come to the attention of the Whispering Pines Beautification Committee that your property is in violation of bylaw 4B, maintenance of sightlines and debris management. The oversized tree on your front lot is actively shedding organic nuisance material, leaves, acorns, onto the public sidewalk and into the driveways of adjacent properties. Furthermore, the canopy overhang poses a hazard to neighborhood aesthetics. You have 14 days to remedy this issue via professional pruning or removal." I read it twice. I laughed. A deep, barking laugh that echoed across my empty porch. Organic nuisance material. That was a new one. I crumpled the paper, threw it in the trash, and went back to my life. I assumed it was a mistake. Some overzealous busybody with a clipboard had walked the neighborhood, seen a leaf on a pristine slab of concrete, and fired off a boilerplate warning. They didn't know I wasn't in their little club. A week later, the second letter arrived. This one was printed on aggressive yellow paper. Second notice. Failure to comply will result in a $50 daily fine. I didn't laugh this time. I walked down to the edge of my property line. To my left, a house lived in by a couple who seemed to wash their cars every afternoon. To my right, a house where the lawn was cut so short it looked like a putting green. And there, standing on the sidewalk, glaring up at my oak tree with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, was Brenda. Brenda was the self-appointed president of the HOA. She was a woman in her late 50s who weaponized pastel clothing. That day, she wore a matching peach twin set and visor, holding a clipboard against her chest like a riot shield. "You're the owner," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said, stepping up to the property line. I purposely didn't step over it. "Did you receive the notices?" She tapped her pen against the metal clip of her board. Tap, tap, tap. a nervous, irritating rhythm. "I got some junk mail," I replied, keeping my voice flat. "Threw it out." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "It wasn't junk mail. It was a formal citation. Your tree is a disaster. Look at this." She gestured wildly to the concrete sidewalk. There were maybe 10 brown leaves resting on the cement. A few crushed acorns lay in the gutter. "It's a tripping hazard. It's an eyesore, and when the wind blows, that mess blows right onto my driveway across the street. My husband just leased a new Mercedes. If one of those nuts dents his hood, you are fully liable." "It's a tree, Brenda," I said, guessing her name from the signature on the bottom of the yellow paper. "It's a liability," she snapped back, "and it violates the neighborhood covenant." "I'm not in your neighborhood," I said, pointing a thumb back at my house. "My lot is separate. I never signed your covenant. You have zero jurisdiction here, so politely get off my sidewalk and stop taping trash to my door." Brenda didn't flinch. She just offered a tight, terrifying little smile. It was the smile of a bureaucrat who knew something I didn't. "You might want to check the county zoning map, Liam," she said smoothly. "When they ran the new sewer main last year, the city replatted the district. Your address was absorbed into the Whispering Pines overlay to share the utility assessment. A notice was mailed. You had 60 days to contest it. You didn't. You're one of us now." She turned on her heel and marched across the street. I stood there, feeling a cold, heavy pit open in my stomach. The wind picked up, rustling the heavy green leaves of the oak above me. An acorn dropped, hitting the concrete with a sharp crack. I walked inside and called my lawyer. My lawyer's name was Greg. He was a tired guy who dealt mostly in real estate closings and minor civil disputes. He charged me $300 to look into the HOA's claim. 2 days later, he called me back. He sounded like a man apologizing for a terminal diagnosis. "She's right, Liam," Greg said over the phone. I could hear him shuffling papers. "Ugh. It's a dirty trick, but it's legal. When the developers petitioned the city for the utility expansion, they drafted an overlay district. They quietly roped your parcel in to pad the tax base for the sewer line. The city mailed you a public notice." "I never got a notice," I shouted, pacing my living room floor. "Or if I did, it looked like a junk mail flyer from the water department." "That's how they designed them," Greg sighed. "By failing to opt out, you were defaulted into the Whispering Pines subdivision matrix. You're legally bound by their HOA bylaws." "So what? They can just tell me to cut down a healthy 100-year-old tree." "They can tell you to do a lot of things. Paint your front door a specific color. Keep your grass at exactly 2.5 inches. And yes, if they deem a piece of landscaping a nuisance or a safety hazard, they can compel you to remove it. And if I don't, they fine you, and when you don't pay the fines, they place a lien on your house. Eventually, they foreclose on it." I hung up the phone. The silence in the house was deafening. I walked to the front window and stared out at the oak. Its branches stretched out like massive arms, offering shade to a street that didn't want it. This tree had survived droughts, blizzards, and hurricane-force winds. It had sheltered generations of owls and raccoons. Now it was going to be brought down by a woman in a peach twin set who didn't like sweeping her driveway. The fines began the next morning. Every day, precisely at 8 a.m., Gary appeared. Gary was the HOA vice president. He was a retired middle manager who wore crisp polo shirts and khaki shorts regardless of the weather. He carried a digital camera and a tape measure. I'd watch him from my kitchen window. He would stand on the edge of the sidewalk, measure the distance from the trunk to the street, photograph the fallen leaves, and document the debris. Then, he would place a red envelope in my mailbox. $50 every single day. Within a month, I owed the HOA $1,500. I tried talking to the other neighbors. I figured someone, anyone, would see the insanity of this. I walked over to the house on my left. The couple who washed their cars obsessively, the husband, Mark, was wiping down his rims when I approached. "Hey, Mark," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "You mind the tree?" Mark avoided my eyes. He rubbed the microfiber cloth harder against the alloy wheel. "Look, Liam, it's a beautiful tree, but Brenda is She's intense. She fined us $200 last month because our trash cans were visible from the street at 6 p.m. We just want to keep our heads down. She's trying to force me to cut it down, I said. Mark sighed, finally looking up. Honestly, it does drop a lot of sap, and the acorns are a pain to rake. Maybe you should just take it down, plant something smaller, a nice Japanese maple. The HOA approves those. I walked away without another word. They were broken, all of them. They had traded their autonomy for perfectly edged lawns and the illusion of control. The standoff escalated in November. The leaves were turning a deep, burned orange, and they were falling heavily. A storm had blown through the night before, stripping a quarter of the canopy and scattering leaves across the pristine concrete driveways of whispering pines. I was on my porch with a cup of coffee when Brenda's Lexus SUV pulled up horizontally across my driveway, blocking me in. She threw the door open and marched up the walkway. Gary flanked her, looking nervous but dutiful. "This is the end of the line, Liam," Brenda snapped. She didn't bother with a greeting. She thrust a manila folder at me. "Your fines have surpassed $3,000. The board held a vote last night. Your tree has been officially declared a structural hazard and an aggressive nuisance. We have contracted a removal service." I didn't take the folder. I took a sip of my coffee. You can't hire people to cut down property you don't own. Under Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the bylaws, if a homeowner fails to remedy a hazard after 30 days of notice, the HOA has the authority to hire outside contractors to abate the nuisance. The cost of removal will be added to your ledger. If you do not pay the balance within 90 days, we will file a lien against this house. She was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with the thrill of authority. She was enjoying this. It wasn't about the leaves. It wasn't about the acorns or the sidewalk. It was about submission. I was the one variable in her perfectly controlled environment that she couldn't account for, and it was driving her insane. "Get off my porch, Brenda. The crew will be here Tuesday," she said, backing down the steps, but keeping her chin high. "I suggest you move your truck out of the driveway so they have room for the wood chipper." I watched them drive away. The rage wasn't hot. It was cold, ice cold. I walked over to the trunk of the oak and placed my hand on the rough, grooved bark. It felt solid, grounded, alive. "Nobody is touching you," I whispered. I had the weekend to figure it out. I spent 48 hours chained to my laptop, reading every county ordinance, environmental statute, and property law I could find. I read about historical easements. The tree wasn't old enough to qualify as a historical landmark. The town required a structure or site to be tied to a specific historical event. I looked into zoning variances, but the HOA's bylaws were ironclad. They had written the rules, and the rules favored the enforcers. By Sunday night, I was exhausted. My eyes burned. I had a headache radiating from the base of my skull. I was staring down the barrel of a multi-thousand-dollar legal battle I couldn't afford, against a bored retiree with a war chest of homeowner dues. I needed a miracle. What I got instead was a chain-smoking arborist named Frank. I called Frank on a desperate recommendation from a guy at the local hardware store. Frank didn't work for the big corporate tree companies. He ran a small outfit out of his beat-up Ford F-250 and was known for knowing every loophole in county landscaping law. He showed up Monday morning, a day before Brenda's executioners were scheduled to arrive. Frank was a wiry guy in his 60s, with skin like worn leather and a cigarette perpetually hanging from the corner of his mouth. He didn't knock on the door. I found him in the front yard, staring straight up into the canopy of the oak, his hands on his hips. "She's a beauty," Frank rasped around the cigarette as I walked out. "Quercus alba. Eastern white oak. Good genes. No sign of rot in the main crotch. Root flare is solid. The HOA wants it gone tomorrow," I said. Frank scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "Amateurs. They see a tree this size, all they see is a mess to clean up. They don't understand the root system is probably holding half this neighborhood's water table together. You cut this down, half these idiots will have flooded basements come spring. Can you put that in a report? Will it stop them?" Frank shook his head slowly. Not legally. If the HOA bylaws say they can abate a nuisance, a water drainage theory won't stop an injunction. You need something concrete, something federal or state level that supersedes a private contract. He walked around the trunk, patting the bark affectionately. Then he stopped. He leaned in close to the trunk, right where a massive branch had snapped off decades ago, leaving a hollowed-out cavity about 15 feet up. He squinted. He pulled a small pair of binoculars from his truck and walked backward, adjusting the focus. "What?" I asked, my pulse quickening. Frank didn't answer. He just smiled, a slow, wicked smile that revealed a row of coffee-stained teeth. He lowered the binoculars and looked at me. "Liam, my friend, are you a fan of bats?" "Bats?" I blinked, confused. "I mean, they eat mosquitoes. Why?" "Because," Frank pointed a calloused finger at the hollow cavity, "you have a maternity colony roosting in that tree. And unless I'm very much mistaken, those are Indiana bats. Myotis sodalis." I just stared at him. "Okay, what does that mean?" "What?" Frank walked over and clapped me on the shoulder. "It means, Liam, that the Indiana bat is a federally recognized endangered species. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service protects them under the Endangered Species Act of 1973. It is a federal crime to harass, harm, or destroy the habitat of an endangered species." He took a long drag of his cigarette and exhaled the smoke toward the pristine, beige houses across the street. "The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over this tree anymore," Frank said softly. "The federal government does." Relief washed over me, so sudden and intense it made my knees weak. "Are you sure? Can we prove it?" "I'm an ISA certified arborist," Frank said, pulling a tablet out of his truck. "I'm going to file an emergency habitat observation report with the State Department of Natural Resources right now. I'll get you a case number. Once that number is generated, this tree is legally untouchable until a federal wildlife biologist comes out to do a full assessment, which, knowing government speed, will take months." We spent the next 2 hours documenting the tree. Frank took photos of the cavity, logged the GPS coordinates, and submitted the forms through an online portal. By noon, I had a printed document with a state seal and a provisional protection order number. I didn't tell Brenda. I didn't tell the HOA. I wanted to see the look on her face. Tuesday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. At 6:45 a.m., the deep, rattling rumble of a diesel engine shook my bedroom windows. I threw off the covers, threw on a heavy flannel shirt over my t-shirt, and walked out onto the porch. A massive yellow bucket truck was backing into my driveway. Behind it, a heavy-duty wood chipper was hitched to a flatbed. 3 men in high-visibility orange vests were pulling chainsaws out of the storage compartments. And standing on the sidewalk, holding a thermos of coffee and wearing a smug, victorious smile, was Brenda. Gary was next to her, holding his digital camera, ready to document the kill. I walked down the steps. The morning air was biting, freezing the dew on the grass. The foreman of the crew, a burly guy with a thick beard, saw me approaching and raised a hand. "Morning, buddy. Just need you to clear the vehicles. We got a work order for a hazard removal." "Morning," I said, my voice calm, much calmer than it had been in weeks. "I'm the homeowner. I didn't authorize this." The foreman looked confused. He pulled a clipboard out of his truck. "I got a signed authorization from the Whispering Pines HOA. Brenda Higgins says here it's an abated nuisance. We're cleared to cut." "He's stalling, Mike," Brenda shouted from the sidewalk. She took a step forward but didn't cross the property line. "The HOA has legal authority. If he interferes, call the police. We are paying you by the hour." Mike the foreman looked at me, then at Brenda, then up at the massive oak. He grimaced. Look, man, I don't want to get in the middle of a neighbor dispute. Oh, but she showed us the bylaws. We have a legal contract to take the tree down." "No, you don't," I said. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the folded DNR document. I handed it to Mike. "What's this?" he asked, unfolding it. "That is an emergency habitat protection order from the Department of Natural Resources." I said loudly, making sure my voice carried across the cold morning air to the sidewalk. That tree is an active roosting site for an endangered species, specifically the Indiana bat. Under federal law, touching that tree carries a fine of up to $50,000 and potential jail time. Mike's eyes went wide. He read the paper, looking at the state seal and the case number. He was a tree guy. He knew exactly what the DNR was, and he knew they didn't mess around. "Whoa," Mike said, taking a step back from the oak as if it were radioactive. "No way. I'm not touching this. My license would get revoked in a heartbeat." "Mike, what are you doing?" Brenda marched up the driveway, her face flushed red with anger. "Turn the saws on. Cut it down." Mike handed her the paper. "Can't do it, lady. Trees protected. Endangered species." Brenda snatched the paper. Her eyes darted across the text. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again like a fish out of water. This is fake. This is a stunt. There are no bats in this neighborhood. We spray for pests every month." "It's a federal offense to cut it down, Brenda," I said, stepping right up to her. "But by all means, hand Mike the chainsaw. Do it yourself. Gary can take pictures for the federal prosecutor." Brenda was shaking, not from the cold, but from pure, unadulterated rage. Her perfectly planned world, her bylaws, her authority, all of it had just hit a brick wall built by the federal government. "Call the police," she screamed at Gary. "Call them right now. He's forging government documents. This is fraud." Gary fumbled for his phone, dropping it once on the concrete before dialing. I didn't move. I just crossed my arms and leaned back against the thick, solid trunk of the white oak. Above me, the branches swayed in the morning breeze. "Let's wait for the cops," I smiled. "I'll make coffee." The police arrived 20 minutes later. A single county cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb, its tires crushing a scattering of brown leaves. The flashing light bar threw stark blue and red shadows across the manicured lawns of whispering pines. 2 officers stepped out into the freezing morning air. The heavy metallic smell of dormant chainsaws hung over the driveway. Brenda was already moving. She practically sprinted to the cruiser, waving her clipboard. She pointed at me, then at the tree, her mouth moving a mile a minute. Gary hovered right behind her, nodding emphatically. I stayed put. I leaned against the trunk of the oak. The bark dug into my shoulder blades through my flannel shirt. It felt solid, immovable. The older of the 2 officers walked up my driveway. His name tag read Ramirez. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had spent his entire career dealing with domestic disputes, traffic accidents, and real crimes, only to be dragged into a suburban turf war over a pile of leaves. "Morning," Officer Ramirez said, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. "The lady over there says you're obstructing a legally contracted work crew and forging government documents." I didn't argue. I just handed him the DNR paperwork. Ramirez unfolded it. He read it in silence. He looked at the state seal. He looked at the case number. He looked up at the massive cavity in the tree, then back at the paper. He let out a long, slow exhale. "Well," Ramirez said, his voice flat, "this is a Department of Natural Resources emergency hold. This isn't our jurisdiction. We enforce the Penal Code, not the Endangered Species Act." He walked back over to the sidewalk. I couldn't hear his exact words, but I saw the exact moment Brenda realized she had lost. Her posture collapsed. The rigid, indignant spine curved. She slapped the clipboard against her thigh, her face twisted in a mask of pure disbelief. Ramirez turned to the tree crew. "Pack it up, boys. It's a federal issue. You touch that tree, you're dealing with game and fish, and they carry bigger guns than we do." Mike, the foreman, didn't need to be told twice. He waved to his crew. In less than 5 minutes, the chainsaws were stowed, the chipper was hitched, and the massive yellow bucket truck was rolling out of my driveway. Brenda didn't look at me. She marched across the street, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement, and slammed her front door so hard I heard the glass rattle. The silence that followed was beautiful. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Brenda don't retreat. They rearm. Because she couldn't touch the tree, she targeted me. The harassment campaign began the very next afternoon. It was petty. It was relentless. Gary started walking my property line twice a day, a tape measure in hand. I received a citation for a rusted lawnmower left on my porch for exactly 3 hours. And I was fined $100 because my mailbox post was deemed structurally unsound and visually abrasive. They sent me a notice demanding I repaint my front door because the faded crimson didn't match the Whispering Pines approved color palette. I threw every single envelope into the trash. They were trying to bleed me out. They wanted to build a lien so massive that I would be forced to sell the property, tree and all. I just needed the DNR to show up. I spent the next 3 weeks holding my breath. Every time the wind blew hard, every time a squirrel darted into the cavity, I panicked. What if Frank was wrong? What if it was just an empty hole? If a federal biologist showed up and found nothing but owl pellets and rotted wood, the protection order would be lifted immediately. Brenda would have the chainsaws back in my driveway before the biologist even drove out of the subdivision. In late November, a white state-issued SUV pulled up to my curb. A woman stepped out. She wore thick hiking boots, olive drab cargo pants, and a heavy fleece jacket with a DNR patch on the shoulder. She carried a massive Pelican case and a clipboard, but her name was Dr. Hayes. I met her halfway down the lawn. My stomach was tied in knots. "You the homeowner?" she asked, not offering a handshake. She was strictly business. "I am." Frank the arborist filed the report. "I saw the report," Dr. Hayes said, staring up at the oak. "It's a bold claim. Indiana bats are incredibly sensitive to habitat disruption. Finding a maternity colony this close to a high-density residential development is highly irregular. Usually, the construction noise alone drives them out." "The tree was here first," I said. "Let's see who's home," she replied. She opened the Pelican case. Inside was a piece of equipment that looked like a cross between a tablet and a medical endoscope. It had a long, flexible fiber-optic cable with a tiny camera and a light on the end. She grabbed a telescoping ladder from her SUV, propped it against the trunk, and climbed up to the edge of the large cavity. I stood on the frost-covered grass, my hands jammed into my pockets, shaking from the cold and the adrenaline. Across the street, I saw a curtain twitch in Brenda's front window. She was watching. She was waiting for the verdict. Dr. Hayes fed the flexible cable into the dark, hollowed-out center of the oak tree. She stared at the screen strapped to her forearm. 1 minute passed, then 2. The wind howled through the bare branches, rattling the last stubborn dead leaves clinging to the oak. "Talk to me," I muttered under my breath. Dr. Hayes adjusted a dial on the cable. She pushed it deeper. Then she froze. She pulled a pair of reading glasses out of her pocket, slid them onto her nose, and leaned closer to the screen. She tapped the screen a few times, capturing images. She looked down at me from the ladder. Her expression was completely unreadable. "Well," I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "They're clustered deep in the heartwood," Dr. Hayes said. "Hibernating. It's a thermal pocket. The wood is acting as insulation against the frost." "Are they—" I swallowed hard. "Are they Indiana bats?" Dr. Hayes slowly descended the ladder. She unhooked the tablet from her arm and held it out to me. The screen showed a grainy, night vision green image. Clustered together, hanging upside down in a tight, shivering mass, were dozens of small, furry bodies. Their noses were pink. Their ears were small and mouse-like. I counted at least 40 individuals, Dr. Hayes said, a faint smile finally breaking through her professional stoicism. "It's a confirmed maternity roost. Congratulations. You are now the steward of a federally protected habitat." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 weeks. "So the HOA can't cut it down. If anyone takes a chainsaw to this tree," Dr. Hayes said, packing her gear back into the Pelican case, "the federal government will seize their assets, fine them $250,000, and press federal charges. I will file the permanent designation this afternoon. You'll get a brass placard in the mail next week." She closed the trunk of her SUV. "Take care of them. We're losing them too fast. I watched her drive away. I looked across the street. The curtain dropped quickly. Brenda had seen the whole thing. I walked over to the tree, rested my forehead against the rough bark, and started laughing. The brass placard arrived via registered mail 6 days later. It was heavy. It read, "Protected wildlife habitat. Interference with this site is a violation of the Endangered Species Act of 1973. I didn't just mount it on the tree. I built a heavy pressure-treated wooden post, sank it 2 feet into the ground with concrete, and mounted the plaque right on the edge of the property line, facing Brenda's house. I thought the war was over. I thought the plaque was the final period at the end of a very long, very exhausting sentence. But Frank the arborist called me a few days later. "Got your official designation?" Frank rasped through the phone, a lighter clicking in the background. "I did. Put the sign up this morning. The HOA hasn't sent a single letter in a week." "Good," Frank said. "Now, did you read the fine print on the DNR Habitat Stewardship Guidelines?" "Not really. Just the part where they can't cut it down." Frank chuckled. It sounded like gravel in a blender. "Oh, buddy, you need to read Section 4. The Disturbance Clause. The tree isn't just protected from chainsaws. The colony is protected from harassment, noise pollution, light pollution. The federal government requires a zero-impact buffer zone around an active maternity roost, especially during mating and pup-rearing seasons." I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still in my kitchen. "Frank, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Frank drawled, "that those bats don't like bright lights, and they don't like loud engines. And since your tree is less than 50 feet from the street, the HOA's landscaping habits are now a matter of federal concern." Oh, I spent the entire weekend reading federal wildlife statutes. Frank was right. The laws were incredibly strict. Any artificial light that altered the feeding or sleeping patterns of an endangered species was classified as a take, a legal term for harming the animal. Any noise above a certain decibel level within the immediate vicinity of the roost was a violation. I didn't write a letter. I didn't tape anything to Brenda's door. I just filed an environmental compliance inquiry with the regional office of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, providing the GPS coordinates of the roost and detailing the surrounding environmental hazards. 2 weeks before Christmas, the federal government came to Whispering Pines. They didn't send a lone biologist this time. They sent an environmental compliance officer. He didn't speak to me. He went straight to Brenda's house. Brenda and her husband had installed massive, high-lumen, stadium-style LED security lights on their garage. Every time a squirrel twitched, the lights kicked on, illuminating my entire front yard and my oak tree like a prison yard. The compliance officer handed Brenda a federal abatement notice. The security lights had to be dismantled. They were disrupting the circadian rhythm of a protected species. Furthermore, the HOA's contracted landscaping company was officially banned from using gas-powered leaf blowers or commercial mowers within a 200-foot radius of the tree. The vibrations and the two-stroke exhaust were a threat to the hibernating colony. If the HOA did not comply, they would face federal fines starting at $10,000 per infraction. The fallout was catastrophic. Brenda tried to fight it. She hired a private environmental lawyer using HOA funds. She tried to sue the DNR, the EPA, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. She argued that the bats were a threat to public health, citing archaic statistics about rabies. The federal judge threw the case out in 20 minutes and ordered the HOA to pay court costs. By February, the HOA had drained its emergency reserve fund, paying for Brenda's pointless legal crusade. To cover the deficit, the board was forced to issue a special assessment. Every homeowner in Whispering Pines was suddenly slapped with a one-time bill for $1,200. The neighborhood erupted. The pristine, united front of beige houses crumbled. Mark, the neighbor who obsessively washed his car, organized a recall petition. A furious mob of homeowners descended on the February board meeting. They didn't care about the leaves anymore. They cared about their wallets. They cared that their property values were now legally tethered to the whims of an endangered bat colony. because their HOA president couldn't leave well enough alone. Brenda was voted out. Gary resigned in disgrace. The new board immediately voided all my outstanding fines and sent a formal letter of apology, begging me not to report them to the EPA if a neighbor accidentally turned on a porch light. I didn't reply. I just filed the letter in a drawer. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, turning the Whispering Pines subdivision into a muddy swamp, but my yard held firm. The massive root system of the white oak drank the meltwater, keeping my basement bone dry, just like Frank said it would. In late April, the tree exploded into life. Tiny, pale green buds coated the massive canopy. The air smelled like wet earth and new growth. One evening, just as the sun was dipping below the roof lines of the beige houses, I took a cup of coffee out to the front porch. The air was crisp. The neighborhood was dead silent. There were no gas mowers roaring. There were no leaf blowers screaming. Just the quiet hum of a suburban evening. I looked up at the massive cavity in the trunk of the oak. A tiny, dark shape dropped from the hole, unfurled a set of jagged, leathery wings, and banked sharply against the purple sky. Then another and another, dozens of them, silent and swift, slicing through the air, eating the mosquitoes that plagued the subdivision. The tree wasn't just a piece of wood anymore. It wasn't a nuisance. It was a fortress. It had outlasted the developers. It had outlasted the chainsaws. And it had broken the people who thought they could pave over the world and expect the world not to fight back. I took a sip of my coffee, leaned back in my chair, and watched the bats dance in the fading light. They were home, and so was I. If you loved watching petty suburban tyrants get absolutely wrecked by the unstoppable power of nature and federal law, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. It helps push these stories out to more people who need a good dose of poetic justice. Drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Share this video with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more deeply grounded, real-life revenge stories every single week. See you next time.